What I do want you to also be familiar with is all the various connectors that will be coming out of the power supply. By the way, I would like to point out that the power supply you're now looking at does not have one of those voltage switches on it. Okay, just to show you that different power supplies are going to have different options. It does still have an on-off switch though. All right, so here we have this whole maze of connectors. And one power supply might actually have all these connectors. Many of them have fewer, some of them even have more. So what are some of these different connectors? Well, we have our 20-pin P1 connector, and then our 24-pin P1 connector. And what do we mean by P1 connector? These are the connectors that would plug into a motherboard. Okay, so back in the motherboards lesson, we talked about form factors and making sure that you have a power supply that matches. You have to have a power supply that has the appropriate motherboard connector to give power to the motherboard. Some power supplies will actually have both of these connectors, both the 20 and the 24-pin connector. Some will only have one or the other, and then you have to make sure you have the correct one. Here we have a Molex connector, and this is the connector that would plug into your old PATA, your parallel ATA hard drives and optical drives. Would be the most typical devices that you would connect a Molex connector to. So if you go back to the storage lesson where we looked at the different storage devices and I had mentioned about the PATA drive we were looking at and the power connector, well, this is where I was referring to when I said we'd come back to it. There is something called the mini connector, which was used to connect to floppy drives. So if you have a computer that still has a floppy drive in it, that's the type of power connector you need. Here we have the SATA power connector. Okay, so if you now are using SATA storage devices and optical drives, this is the power connector you need. And then we have our PCIe connector, which would give power to certain PCIe devices. And one other type of power connector that I'd like to talk to you about here, and it's funny because the picture that I have here is actually an adapter, not the actual connector, but I wanted to show you that it comes in both 4-pin and 8-pin. Okay, and this is a 12-volt power connector that is specifically designed to provide power to the CPU or a processor. Okay, so please understand that it does have, some come with 4-pin, some come with 8-pin. I've also seen where sometimes the processor has 8 pins, but if you have a power supply that only has a 4-pin connector, you have two options. You can either get an adapter like I have shown here, or there are in some cases a way to go ahead and plug just the 4 pins into the slot, into the correct 4 slots and get it enough power. Okay? It's not recommended, but it is something that I've seen that you can get away with. All right, so, these are some of the various connectors that you may find and you want to be familiar with on your power supplies.